Welcome back to Fast Market on the TD Ameritrade Network. I'm Tom White, and I'm joined by my co-host Kevin Hinks. But Kevin, markets are in the green, but let's bring in our next guest, and that's going to be Landon Swann, the co-founder of LikeFolio.com. Thanks for joining us today, Landon.
To be here, thank you.
All right, we're talking housing. The housing market is hot, to say the least. I'm sure it's hotter down there in Florida than it is up here near the Chicago area, Landon. But what kind of data out of LikeFolio are you guys seeing in this space? Because we've got KB Homes start kicking off earnings tomorrow. Your data points here from LikeFolio on the housing market.
Sure. So we don't actually cover KB Homes directly, but we do cover 400 or 500 consumer trends overall where people are talking about taking a specific action, and we can tie those to certain industry sectors or even companies. So things like moving or buying a new house or inflation fears or the price of lumber, all that kind of stuff that people talk about in general, we can apply to KB Homes. What's interesting, you talk about, the difference in the markets. One of the things that LikeFolio found, I think it was 9 or 10 months ago, was something we called the urban exodus, where so many people were moving from big cities to smaller cities or moving south to Texas and Florida, places like that. Because of all the lockdowns and politics and all kinds of things that are driving that. But that's actually become sort of a, flat quarter over quarter, flat year over year. You compare it to 2019 and it's plus 37%. There's a big move, but I think it's started to stabilize a little bit. It's still very high. It's elevated levels where people are moving away from the larger cities. So it's interesting to see the difference in the markets in places like New York or Chicago versus, Texas or Florida, things like that. But I think one of the big drivers is going to be both, two of them really, price of lumber and inflation fears. So, and I think those maybe work against each other, right? So if you're thinking about building a home, obviously you want the price of lumber to be lower. It's not better lumber if it's more expensive. It's not the fancy Italian imported lumber or whatever. It's just the same stuff, but you're paying more. So you're not getting that back once lumber prices go back down. So it's going to put the brakes on a lot of people thinking about buying a home. And I can tell you the price of lumber, that people just discussing it on social media is plus 170% year over year. So people are really talking about this way more than they were a year ago. And when you compare it to 2019, I mean, it's incredible. It's 25 times what it was 2 years ago. So that was a non-factor 2 years ago. And now it's a very large concern and increasing on a year over year basis. But the big one there, inflation fear, that's the one I think that really stands out, plus 470% year over year, people talking about inflation. And I think that's the huge concern. That's actually moving up on a quarterly basis, whereas the price of lumber concerns are down on a quarterly basis. And I think, I'm not sure how savvy people are if they're thinking about, well, if my dollar is going to be worth less, I should buy a house now or build a house now. Therefore, the house price will increase in a dollar value. I'm not sure if that goes through people's minds. I think really inflation is just a more scary term because that can lead to all kinds of bad things. And maybe short term, your home will go up in value of those depreciated dollars, but inflated dollars. But long term, there could be some economic issues or some fallout there. So I think that those things are sort of putting the brakes on what could be people talking about building a home, which we're actually seeing down a little bit year over year. If you look at just how many people are talking about building a house, it is elevated versus 2019. It's about 25% higher than what was normal 2 years ago, but it has peaked and it's down a little bit. So we're moving away from that, and it's starting to revert back to the mean. We'll see where it goes from here, but it's interesting to see how much people were building and renovating homes during the lockdowns, and just I think you stick somebody in the same house for months at a time. You're either going to build a new kitchen or you're going to build a new house. We saw so much of that, but now it's starting to revert to the mean. So everything that I'm seeing on our data is showing that maybe building is slowing down a little bit, or at least the elements that would cause people to hit the brakes and pause a little bit on building are increasing. So I think that could be the case.
Landon, one great thing or interesting thing about watching commodities is they're kind of self-correcting. Right? When lumber gets up to high prices, eventually builders saying, I'm going to wait and demand drops. And then it's self-correcting. you're looking at the overall housing market. We're looking at KB Homes because they have earnings tomorrow. But the one thing about KB Homes is that it's a starter house. It's a first or second house, or it's what do they call it? Active adult homes is what they focus on. And so their prices are a little lower. The problem with that is a 10% jump in their input prices affect their prices more, right? So it's a bigger deal for a smaller home than a $10 million home or a $1 million home. So that's why this is so fascinating. But what does LikeFolio's data say, or does it say about what commodities do and things like that? Some of this is obviously commodities because it's price of lumber. Inflation is the bond market, but price of lumber is clearly a commodity. What are you guys seeing? What's your overall thoughts about the less demand based on higher prices, and what will happen? What do you guys see what will happen if prices come down significantly?
Right. So, if you look at people talking about the price of lumber, that's something that you only talk about if it's really high, right? I mean, nobody's talking about the deals they're getting on 2x4s. This is when it goes really high. That's when people talk about it. And again, it's 25 times what it was 2 years ago, plus almost double what it was a year ago, but it's actually down over the last quarter. So it's actually moved down quite a bit. So I'm not sure if people are getting used to it, or the other case is people are looking at moving less, which is what we're showing. We're seeing people not only moving less, that's down, buying a home down, building a home down. So all these things, I think a lot of people made their move over the last year. And I think all of that, I guess, was maybe potentially pull forward demand where they've done their move. They've either built, they've moved, they've whatever, and they're finished now. So the data that we're seeing on a macro level would suggest that the amount of people buying or moving is actually on the decrease. I'm not sure what expectations are. That's going to be really important. But you talk about things that self-correct. What's interesting is home prices are about 20% up year over year, and the cost to build a house is up almost 20% year over year. So they're going to move together. I mean, people will find deals. If it's cheaper to build, they'll build. If it's cheaper to buy, they'll buy. And those markets are always going to find their way. But as long as we're having, supply chain issues, lumber prices high, labor shortages, that's going to continue to push the cost to build up, which is going to continue to push the cost to buy up. But when we look at some of the companies that may be benefiting from either renovation or new home sales or moving, like Home Depot, Lowe's, Wayfair, we're seeing that those companies are actually all positive on the LikeFolio radar. So, we talk about the earnings score all the time. Those are all positive. Home Depot's a plus 33, Lowe's is plus 57, Wayfair's a plus 5. So the companies that would benefit from that kind of action are actually seeing an increased number of customers and increased happiness, things like that. So the ripple effect there, you could either say that they're second order, or you could say that maybe they're a canary in the coal mine, saying that people are participating in these activities. But on the macro level, I'm concerned that the inflation fear is so high, and the people are still talking about the price of lumber. And you look at people talking about building a home, buying a home, all that is down.
Yeah, and that's kind of the angle I wanted to go to, Landon, here, because if you've seen some of the housing stocks or the things you put into your home, how well they did in 2020 and the early stages of 2021 through the fall, they're all down significantly. Whether it's Wayfair, Restoration Hardware, Williams-Sonoma, they're all getting kicked, their butt kicked down the road at this point. But when you look at that, is that the canary in the coal mine that, hey, their stock prices are falling because demand is falling and margins are also decreasing for a lot of these companies because they can't get workers. Wages are going up. They can't find raw materials to work with, right? That are spiking in price due to lumber prices and everything else. Is that, are you seeing any data from that side of it that this might be the canary in the coal mine that, hey, home prices are up nearly 20% year over year, and then everything else is, I just can't move right now because I'm looking right now and there's no inventory out there?
Yeah, it's wild. It is unbelievable how few homes there are. And I'll tell you from a personal experience, you know that we moved to Florida recently, but we actually had a lot and a plan in Kentucky with a house all done with an architect and everything. And then all of a sudden, it was right before we're about to pull the trigger, lumber, it was going to be about an extra $150,000 on wood. And we're like, well, this isn't fancy wood. This is regular wood.
Right.
So these things affect people. It can change lives. I mean, that's why I'm in Florida right now. We didn't build the house. So there's a lot of people out there facing these kinds of decisions. And if I think the inflation fear is the biggest one. That's a huge number. 5 times as many people talking about it last year. And last year there's a concern because they're printing money like crazy last year as well. And so if you have a lot of uncertainty about not only where the economy and just in general where the U.S. is going, but how it affects your life, maybe you're in an industry where that could really change things, or you go to the grocery store, you notice how expensive things are getting, and you're just not sure if you can afford that new mortgage or you can afford moving, and you're going to put the brakes on a little bit. And that's what we're seeing. That's what the data is showing right now is everything's down just a little bit on a year-over-year basis. We had a big bump in 2020 and that continued in 2021, but now over the last little bit, it's started to slow down. So I'm very interested to watch this earnings report. Again, it's not a company that we covered directly. People don't generally talk about the builder of their home, so we couldn't do that. But just all the macro stuff that we do cover would point to a potential slowdown in the number of homes being built.
Kev, did you have a follow-up here for Landon real quick?
No, I'm just really fascinated by the relationship between, everyone's got one of those stories like that, Landon, that you talked about with your home, and how if you have that mobility and can be agile with your choices, and you made a choice, right? That $150,000 extra for lumber made another state a better value for you than where you were planning on going. And it's amazing that is happening. I mean, you see the numbers from states. Some states are money flows. If there's one theme from this conversation, money flows where it's treated better, right? And the minute that happened, buying an existing home became more attractive. And so money flowed to where it was treated better. So I think that this is a discussion that everyone should pay attention to and decide, is this temporary or is this permanent, guys?
Yep.
Yeah.
Last point I want to make, Tom,
go ahead.
Kevin talked about, I had the mobility. And I think that, I'm in a unique position as an entrepreneur to have that mobility, but I think there are millions of people that now have that mobility that didn't have it 2 years ago because of COVID and the lockdowns. You work from home, you're doing Zoom calls, a lot of remote workers out there where all of a sudden, they were working in New Jersey, driving an hour to get into Manhattan. And now they're saying, you know what, why don't I move to somewhere else and buy a house or whatever? So I think these are really important issues to look at, and they're going to tell you where the money is going, just like Kevin talks about. Money flows to the easiest path, and there's way more people now than 2 years ago who have the mobility and have the ability to make these kinds of decisions, and so they're going to be super sensitive to things like price of lumber, labor shortages, inflation.
Yeah, so Landon, just based on that data, are you guys bullish or neutral on the housing market and the home builder stocks here at this point?
I'd have to lean just a little bit bearish, just because of all of the, the potential slowdown factors, the fear of inflation, the talk about the lumber prices, and just the fact that, people are talking about building a house, renovating, moving, or buying. All of those are negative on a year-over-year basis. Not huge numbers, but still negative over year-over-year basis. And I guess it's not surprising because over the last year it's been a pretty wild year, but it's definitely slowing down. So if the expectations were that this is the new normal, there's going to be disappointment in my opinion. But if the expectations are tempered and they're a little bit more realistic, they may come in line.
All right, great data points as always, Landon. Appreciate it. And hey, remember, next time I'm down there in Delray, I'd like to look at houses on the east side of the Intercoastal, not the west side. I'll meet you down on Atlantic Avenue. We'll have a cocktail and talk about that.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you.
All right, Landon, thank you so much. Have a great day. He's the co-founder of LikeFolio.com.